My name is Riley Sterling. For the past 6 years, my life has been a carefully constructed blueprint of independence. I've built a career in the architectural restoration of historic homes in Charleston, a city where the past is always present, whispering through the swaying moss of ancient oaks and the creak of centuries-old floorboards. I don't just renovate houses. I listen to their stories, peel back layers of paint and plaster to find their original soul, and give them a future worthy of their history. It's quiet, methodical work, a conversation between my hands and the ghosts of craftsmen long gone. This quiet, however, was a recent acquisition. Before the scent of sawdust and turpentine, my world was one of polished steel and gleaming glass in the fast-paced world of Chicago real estate. I was driven, focused, and I'd worked tirelessly since my early 20s to build a life that was solid and secure. I flipped houses, made savvy investments, and created a financial foundation that was all my own. Nothing ostentatious, but it was mine, built with my own two hands and a sharp mind. I met Oliver there, 6 years ago. He was a stark contrast to my world of calculated risks and tangible assets. He gave every impression of coming from old, effortless wealth. He had the poise, the self-assurance, the refined tastes that spoke of a life lived without financial anxiety. He never talked about money in specifics, but he wore the best suits, drove the newest cars, and indulged in high-end everything with a casual grace that I, at first, found captivating. His parents, Thomas and Victoria, were cut from the same fine, but threadbare, cloth. They carried themselves with an old-money posture, a patrician stillness that suggested they were inherently above the fray of everyday life. Their sprawling home in a gated suburban community was immense, a museum of antique furnishings and grand, ancestral portraits that projected an image of unshakable wealth at every turn. But I wasn't some naive, starstruck woman. I'd worked with truly wealthy people, the kind whose fortunes were as solid as the foundations of the buildings they owned. Something about Oliver's family felt performative. Thomas and Victoria would drop casual, condescending remarks like, "You're so fortunate to be joining our family," and "A woman like you must be overjoyed by the security we can offer." I should have questioned why they assumed I was desperate for their brand of stability. Oliver himself would occasionally set off quiet alarm bells. He'd borrow money for small things, a dinner, a weekend trip, and then conveniently forget to repay it. Once, he suggested I put my name on the deed of a property he wanted to purchase, claiming it was better for tax reasons. I shut that down immediately with a polite but firm no. Still, I brushed aside these warning signs. I was in love, and love, I told myself, required a degree of trust. I convinced myself his casualness with money was a product of his privileged upbringing, not a sign of something more insidious. Until the night they made their move. Oliver and I had been married for 2 years when his parents invited us to dinner at their estate. It wasn't an unusual occurrence. They relished these extravagant family gatherings, complete with costly wine and endless discussions about their legacy and traditions. But that night, the atmosphere was different, charged with a strange, anticipatory energy. Oliver was more animated than usual, his mother was glowing with a kind of predatory anticipation, and his father, typically impassive, wore a faintly satisfied expression. Midway through the meal, Thomas cleared his throat, a theatrical sound that commanded attention. He brandished a thick stack of papers, placing it on the polished mahogany table before me like a prized offering. "We've been thinking about the future," Victoria said, her voice a warm, almost motherly purr, "about what's best for our family, for our collective security." I glanced at Oliver, who was watching my reaction with an unnerving intensity. "We need to guarantee stability for generations to come," Thomas added, nudging a heavy, gold-plated pen toward me. "This contract allows us to pool our resources to become one united financial entity, working in perfect harmony." I picked up the first page and scanned it. My blood ran cold. They weren't proposing a partnership. They were demanding a surrender. The contract stipulated that I transfer literally everything, my savings, my investment portfolio, my real estate assets, even my personal checking accounts, into a family trust that would be squarely and irrevocably under their control. My gut twisted into a tight, painful knot. "It's just a formality, babe," Oliver said smoothly, his voice a silken trap. He flashed that confident, charming smile that had once made my heart flutter. "You trust me, don't you?" Something in me, a deep, dormant instinct for self-preservation, snapped into focus. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow, calming breath, and smiled. A real smile, not a polite one. It felt like the sun coming out after a long winter. "Then you'll love what's in my safe deposit box," I said softly. A profound silence descended over the room. Oliver's grin faltered, a crack in his perfect facade. I saw Victoria's knuckles whiten as she gripped the stem of her wine glass. Thomas's jaw clenched, a tiny muscle twitching in his cheek. Their collective arrogance, so solid just moments before, began to crumble. They had counted on my shock, on my emotional response, perhaps even on my flattery at being included in their legacy. They had not, for 1 second, expected calm, smiling defiance. "What's in the box?" Oliver asked, his voice tight, the charm stripped away to reveal the raw steel of his will beneath. "Oh, just some paperwork," I said casually, shrugging as if it were of no consequence. "Certain documents I had drawn up before we got married. A little something for my own protection. Just in case." The stillness in the room grew dense, heavy. And then, as though it had been perfectly orchestrated, the butler, a man who had been with their family for decades, entered the dining room. "Ma'am," he said, his gaze fixed on me, "your lawyer has arrived." I wish I could have framed their expressions. Oliver turned pale, a sickly, greenish hue under the warm light of the chandelier. Victoria wore the look of someone who had just been forced to swallow a lemon whole. As for Thomas, he simply stared at me, his hand tightening its grip on the contract as if he could force it into submission through sheer willpower. A moment later, Helen, my lawyer and one of my oldest friends, walked in. She was a vision of cool, collected competence in a sharp navy suit. "Good evening," she greeted the room, her voice crisp and clear as she set her leather briefcase on the table. "I'm told there's a contract my client is being asked to sign." Victoria was the first to regain her composure, her voice sharp and brittle. "This is a private family matter. There is no need for lawyers here." Helen ignored her completely, her attention focused on the papers. She flipped through the pages of the contract, her sharp eyes skimming each section. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible laugh. "Wow," she said, shaking her head slowly. "This isn't just a bad contract. This is a masterclass in blatant financial manipulation." Oliver shuffled uncomfortably in his chair. "It's not like that," he began, but Helen cut him off with a raised hand. "Actually, it is exactly like that," she said firmly, her gaze meeting mine with a look of shared understanding. "If you had signed this, Riley, they would have total and unilateral authority over all of your holdings. They could drain your bank accounts, sell your properties, and you would be utterly powerless to stop it." Victoria's face flushed a deep, angry red. "It's about trust," she argued, her tone now saccharine and cloying. "It's about becoming one family." "Right," Helen replied flatly. "That would explain the clause on page 4 that states they have full withdrawal rights and the power to liquidate all assets, while my client cannot access any of her own money without their unanimous written consent." She turned to me, a small, proud smile playing on her lips. "Riley, it's fortunate you have a lawyer who actually reads the fine print." Oliver abruptly stood, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded, his eyes locked on mine. "Why am I doing this?" I repeated, my voice calm but laced with a disbelief that was all too real. "You just tried to orchestrate the polite, legal theft of my entire life's work." Victoria's voice took on a cloying sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Honey, this is all just a terrible misunderstanding." "No," I said coolly, the fog of my love for him finally, blessedly, lifting. "It isn't." Rising from my seat, I took a slow, deep breath. "I'm done here." As I stood to leave, Oliver's hand shot out and clamped around my wrist, his grip firm enough to convey a threat. His charming smirk was gone, replaced by an icy, dangerous stare. "Don't do this," he hissed under his breath, his voice low and menacing. "You really don't want to make enemies of this family." "Enemies?" I repeated, yanking my hand from his grasp. I looked him straight in the eye, my own gaze unwavering. "That's exactly what you've just made of me." Victoria abruptly shifted tactics, her face crumpling into a mask of wounded fragility. She let out a shaky laugh and placed a hand over her chest, as dramatic as a silent film star. "Darling, you're blowing this all out of proportion. This is just a big mix-up." I stayed silent, letting her performance hang in the air. She persisted. We only wanted to keep you safe. This world can be so treacherous for a woman alone. Money can slip through your fingers in an instant. We wanted to protect you, to protect all of us. Safe? I asked, my voice soft. Safe from what, exactly? From my own competence. Helen folded her arms, her expression one of polite boredom. If that were true, why did you structure the trust so that my client had no control whatsoever over her own money? Thomas let out an audible sigh, a sound of profound irritation, as if he were losing patience with a disobedient child. Fixing a steely glare first on his wife, then on Oliver, he said, "This has all become unnecessarily dramatic. Let's proceed like adults." I nearly laughed. Like adults? I echoed. You mean the sort of adults who try to swindle their own daughter-in-law? His expression darkened, but I refused to be cowed. Their desperation was a palpable thing in the room, a sour, metallic scent beneath the aroma of expensive wine and roasted duck. They had been so convinced that I would be too rattled, too emotional, too in love to think logically. They had badly, fatally underestimated me. That's when Victoria dropped her next bombshell, her voice laced with an exasperated sigh. I suppose, she began, this means you have no interest in the inheritance either? My head swiveled toward her. Inheritance? Oliver shot his mother a sharp, warning look, but she pressed on, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. Oh, she said lightly, as if it were a detail she'd forgotten. Did Oliver neglect to mention his great-grandfather's estate in Rhode Island? The true family fortune. I felt Helen's gaze flick to me. We were both realizing the same thing in the same instant. Their scheme wasn't just about my finances. It was about something much bigger. The estate is in probate, Victoria continued, warming to her theme. And we will soon have full control. But if you're going to be so difficult, she trailed off, letting the implication dangle in the air like a baited hook. She was toying with me, holding up this shiny carrot, expecting me to jump at the promise of even more wealth. But all I saw was a disturbing, repeating pattern, a family of grifters, skilled in the art of taking what never belonged to them. And Oliver? He had known all along and had never said a single word to me, his wife. I turned to him, my voice quiet. Were you ever going to tell me? He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his composure finally cracking. I was waiting for the right time, all right? When things were more aligned. Aligned for who, Oliver? He said nothing because we both knew the truth. He would never have told me if his mother hadn't forced his hand. We left that night without another word. In the car, Helen massaged her temples, letting out a long sigh. You realize what's happening, don't you, Riley? Yeah, I murmured, watching the perfectly manicured lawns of the neighborhood slip by in the darkness. They're not just after my money. They need it for something. Exactly. She tapped her fingers against the side of her briefcase. If that Rhode Island estate is as large as they claim, they'll do whatever it takes to secure it. I stared out the window, the wheels in my mind turning, clicking into place. What do you think the odds are that Oliver is in debt? Helen shot me a pointed glance. You think he's been hiding something from you? I'm sure of it, I said, a cold certainty settling in my gut. In retrospect, it all made a sickening kind of sense. The flashy lifestyle that always seemed to be funded by someone else, the designer clothes, the way he bragged about money but rarely seemed to have any of his own to pay the bills. If he was drowning in debt, then the trust scheme wasn't just about controlling me, it was his Hail Mary, his desperate, last-ditch attempt to save himself. The next morning, I did what I should have done 2 years ago. I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional Helen recommended. I wanted every detail, no matter how small. His credit reports, any hidden debts, his past business dealings, all of it. The truth, when it came back, was even worse than I had imagined. Oliver was massively in debt, maxed out credit cards, multiple personal loans, and even a business loan for a shell company that he had secretly and illegally taken out in my name. Enraged, I confronted him that evening when he came back to our apartment to collect some of his things. How long have you been stealing from me? I asked, my voice shaking with a fury I couldn't contain. Oliver blinked, feigning innocence. What are you talking about? I hurled the file from the investigator onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. You took out a loan using my name. You've been swimming in debt, lying to me every single day, and you had the audacity to expect me to sign over everything I own so you could fix your own miserable problems. For once, he didn't bother to deny it. Instead, he did something far more appalling. He laughed. A bitter, hollow, condescending laugh. "You were always so careful with your money," he sneered, his face twisting into an ugly mask. "So meticulous. I thought eventually you'd understand the bigger picture, that we needed to be practical about our future. But you just don't get it, do you?" My heart pounded in my chest. "So you planned this from the beginning?" He looked at me then, his face inscrutable, his eyes cold and empty. "You have no idea what you've just started," he said, his voice low and threatening. I took a step back, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Are you threatening me?" He didn't reply. He just gave me one last, cold glare, grabbed his coat, and slammed the door on his way out. I stood there, my fists clenched, my fear dissolving into a white-hot, clarifying rage. If he believed this was over, he couldn't have been more wrong. After he left, I barely slept. The puzzle pieces of our marriage clicked into place, forming a picture that was both grotesque and heartbreaking. Every suspicious act, every casual lie, every subtle maneuver had been designed to pave the way for their grand con. By morning, my phone buzzed. It was Helen. "You need to come to my office," she said, her voice tight with an urgency that sent a chill down my spine. Immediately. I didn't waste time asking why. When I arrived, she was waiting with another file on her desk. "You're not going to like this," she warned, pushing it toward me. I flipped it open, and my stomach dropped. There was another woman. Actually, two. Their names were Simone and Nicole. "It seems Oliver has been lying about a lot more than just money," Helen said quietly, her voice full of a gentle sympathy that almost broke me. She turned over two photographs of the women. They were both breathtakingly beautiful, and both years younger than me. "Simone was with him 2 years ago, right before he met you," Helen explained. "He promised her an engagement, convinced her he was a wealthy investor, took out a loan in her name, emptied her savings account, and then vanished without a trace." I felt sick. "And Nicole?" Helen shook her head sadly. "Nicole is his current project. He never really ended things with her when he married you. In fact, he's still very much involved with her. They're engaged." I took a few seconds to absorb the blow. "He's engaged." My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Helen nodded. "He proposed to Nicole last month. He told her they'd be married in 6 weeks." My mouth went dry. So my husband, a married man, was engaged to someone else, all the while conning both of us. Then I realized something else, something that made the whole sordid affair even more twisted. That Rhode Island inheritance his parents were so fixated on. The terms of the will probably stipulated that the heir had to be married to inherit. That explained his desperation to keep me legally bound, and also why he was lining up a replacement for me. This wasn't just about siphoning off my money to pay his debts. It was part of a bigger, more desperate plan to secure a fortune he hadn't earned. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to speak to Nicole. Helen, ever resourceful, arranged a discreet meeting at a quiet cafe the following afternoon. The moment Nicole walked in, I felt a pang of profound sympathy. She radiated a happy, naive glow, her face full of the excitement of a woman in love, planning her wedding. She had no idea she was engaged to a monster. I introduced myself, and as soon as I said Oliver's name, her eyes flashed with a flicker of suspicion. "How do you know him?" she asked, her tone wary. "Because," I said, my voice gentle as I laid my platinum wedding band on the table between us, "he's my husband." Nicole's reaction was visceral. The color drained from her face, and her hand flew to her mouth. "That's impossible," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "I'm afraid it's not." I watched as her trembling fingers reached into her handbag and withdrew her own engagement ring, placing it on the table next to my wedding band. 2 identical, custom-designed rings, side by side. She began to cry then, silent tears spilling down her cheeks as she recounted her own story. Oliver had told her all about a forthcoming inheritance, but had insisted that he had to be married to receive it. He had promised her a glamorous new life in Europe, a future filled with travel and luxury. He had already convinced her to hand over most of her life savings to him for a joint investment. My hands balled into fists under the table. "Are you still in contact with him?" I asked, my voice steady. She nodded, wiping her cheeks with a napkin. Yes, he's taking me to meet his parents this weekend for dinner. I exhaled slowly. Perfect, I said. Let's go disrupt that little family gathering. Nicole, her grief quickly hardening into a cold, diamond-hard fury, agreed to play along. She continued to text Oliver, feigning ignorance, her messages full of enthusiasm for their so-called future. Meanwhile, I dug deeper. With the help of a forensic accountant Helen hired, we uncovered an offshore bank account tied to Oliver, a secret stash where he had been funneling the illicit funds. The debt I'd already discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. I also had the investigator look into his parents. That valuable Rhode Island property? They had no legal rights to it yet. The probate process was tangled in legal red tape. They needed a stable, legally married heir to gain full control. Oliver was their pawn. But now I had all the ammunition I needed to destroy their entire crooked operation. The evening of the grand family dinner arrived quickly. Oliver was under the impression that he would be introducing his darling, unknowing fiancé to his gracious, doting parents. Instead, he was about to walk into the nightmare he had so carefully crafted for others. Nicole and I arrived together. I walked in first, finding Thomas and Victoria already seated at their lavish dining table, sipping wine as if they were presiding over a royal banquet. Victoria's expression soured the instant she saw me. "What on earth are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice dripping with disdain. I smiled serenely. "You really think I'd miss a family affair?" Right on cue, Oliver stepped into the room, his hand possessively on Nicole's arm. He froze mid-step, the color draining from his face as he took in the scene, me, standing there calmly, and then Nicole, standing beside me, her face a mask of cold fury. I watched the panic flicker in his eyes as his carefully constructed worlds collided. "Babe," he said to Nicole, his voice struggling for a semblance of composure. Why? Why is she here?" Nicole crossed her arms over her chest. "You tell me, Oliver." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Victoria stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I will not have this kind of spectacle at my dinner table." I chuckled softly. "Oh, I think you should pay very close attention to this particular spectacle." I glanced toward Helen, who stood waiting quietly by the doorway. "Helen, would you care to begin?" Helen stepped forward, opening a thick folder. "Let's start with the fraud," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "Then we can move on to the matter of bigamy." The room erupted. Victoria let out a horrified gasp. Thomas slammed his wine glass down on the table so hard that red wine splashed onto the white tablecloth like a spray of blood. Nicole, with a cry of pure rage, hurled her engagement ring at Oliver's chest. Oliver himself just stood there, his eyes brimming with a venomous hatred, all of it directed at me. He finally grasped that his careful, charming facade was gone forever, his elaborate scam exposed for all to see. The ensuing silence was heavier, more charged with impending disaster, than the one that had preceded it. Oliver remained rooted to the spot, his hands gripping the edge of the dining table until his knuckles turned white. His mother's face was a contorted mask of rage and shock, her lips moving as if she yearned to scream, but could produce no sound. His father stared blankly ahead, the full weight of the consequences of their schemes finally settling upon him like a tombstone. "Fraud?" Victoria finally spat, her voice finding its shrill register again. "Where did you come up with these absurd, slanderous accusations?" Helen calmly laid a thick file on the table. "The evidence is all right here," she said. "Bank statements, loan applications, forged signatures, and, oh yes, irrefutable proof that Oliver secured a substantial business loan using his wife's name and credit, entirely without her knowledge or consent. That alone, I believe, is a felony." Oliver jolted as though he'd been struck by lightning, but it was Victoria who pounded the table. "This is a private family matter." "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "It stopped being a family matter the second you tried to rob me. Now it's a legal matter." Nicole chimed in, her voice trembling with a righteous anger. "And what about the bigamy, Oliver? Because the last time I checked, I was engaged to a single man, not a lying, cheating, married con artist." Oliver slowly got to his feet, the legs of his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Nicole," he began, his voice taking on a low, persuasive tone, "I can explain." She laughed, a bitter, heartbreaking sound. Oh, please do. Explain to me, to your wife, to your parents, how all of this is just a big misunderstanding. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Yes, I was involved with you while I was still technically married, he admitted, his gaze flicking toward me for a fraction of a second. But my marriage to her was over a long time ago. We were just drawing out the final details. I let out a derisive snort. You were so done with me that you tried to maneuver me into signing away my entire net worth? That sounds pretty active to me. Nicole faced him, her eyes narrowed to slits. So, everything you told me, was it all a lie? She asked, her voice quivering. All our plans, all our dreams, the wedding, everything? For a split second, an unidentifiable emotion flickered across Oliver's handsome face. Perhaps it was regret, perhaps it was just the sheer panic of being caught. I meant it, he said, his voice soft. I wanted that future with you, Nicole. I truly did. While you were still married, she shot back, her voice thick with scorn. He had no answer. Seething, Victoria swung her glare back to me. You orchestrated this entire ambush. You conniving, vengeful shrew. You're trying to ruin us. I actually laughed out loud. Ruin you. I repeated, my voice light. Oh, Victoria, you did that all by yourselves. I just arranged the lighting. Oliver, who had been too quiet for too long, suddenly exploded. You think you've won? He roared, his words slicing through the tense air. Everyone swiveled to face him. He aimed the full force of his fury at me. You act so innocent, so wronged, but you've loved having the upper hand from the very beginning. You relished holding the purse strings, making me come to you, begging for money. I raised my eyebrows. That's a funny way of describing me safeguarding my own finances from a man I now know to be a chronic liar and a thief. His face tightened. You never trusted me. You never gave me any reason to, I countered, my voice calm. He slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the silverware and making Nicole jump. I was your husband. You were supposed to stand by me, not betray me like this. Nicole backed away a step, shaken by his violent outburst. Victoria looked mortified, not by his actions, but by the crassness of his display. And for the first time that night, Thomas opened his mouth. Sit down, Oliver, he commanded, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. Oliver inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring, but after a tense moment, he lowered himself back into his chair. Helen cleared her throat, flipping methodically through her papers as if the emotional outburst had been nothing more than a brief intermission. Since tempers seem to be flaring, she said, her voice a cool balm on the heated atmosphere, perhaps it's best if we are concise. She held up a single piece of paper. First, Miss Dubois has already filed a police report regarding the money you swindled from her. That's one criminal charge of fraud. Oliver's fists clenched. Second, Helen continued, her tone matter-of-fact, the forged signatures on the business loan you took out in your wife's name have also been reported to the authorities. That's another, more serious, criminal charge. Victoria's mouth fell open. You involved the police? I nodded, my eyes fixed on Oliver. Did you really think I would just let you walk away from this, scot-free? His hands began to tremble. Helen went on, unaffected. Third, regarding that Rhode Island estate, the inheritance you were all relying on for your financial bailout, it seems the probate court has been made aware of your family's rather extensive, and previously undisclosed, debt. Thomas jerked upright in his chair. What debt? With a cryptic half-smile, Helen replied, You didn't know? Most of your family's assets have been frozen, pending an investigation into fraudulent activities. A stunned, horrified hush enveloped the table. Victoria lost whatever color had remained in her cheeks. No, that can't be true. I'm afraid it can, Helen said, clicking her pen shut with a sound of finality. It seems the real motive behind pressuring my client to merge her assets with yours wasn't about family unity at all. It was about using her clean, stable finances to bail you out of significant financial trouble. Victoria, now desperate and unhinged, whirled on Oliver. You fool, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. All you had to do was secure this simple arrangement. Now we're finished. Utterly finished. He grimaced, his face pale. Don't pin this solely on me, Mother. This was your plan, too. But you were supposed to execute it, she spat back. Thomas massaged his temples, looking as if he had aged a decade in the last hour. Nicole glared at Oliver, her body trembling with rage. "I want him in handcuffs," she declared. "Don't worry," I told her softly. "It's happening." Oliver whipped his head around to face me, his eyes wide with a final, desperate plea. "You wouldn't." I met his gaze without flinching. "Watch me." And that's when the first wail of sirens began to cut through the quiet, suburban night. Oliver was taken away that evening, charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and bigamy, more than enough to keep him behind bars for a very long time. His parents? Their precious, mortgage to the Hilt estate fell into foreclosure within months. Their world, built on a foundation of lies and illusions, had crumbled to dust. Nicole and I met for drinks the following day at a sunny outdoor cafe. We raised our glasses and clinked them together, a small, satisfying sound of victory. Some people say revenge is a pointless, empty pursuit, that it doesn't solve anything. But for us, for the two women who had nearly lost everything to a family of predators, watching their downfall wasn't just satisfying. It was justice. And sometimes, when people try to crush you, the greatest victory is not just surviving, but ensuring that they can never harm anyone again. It was a somber, but necessary, end to a chapter of my life, and the beginning of a new one where I would be even more careful, even more protective of the life I had built, and even more committed to trusting my own quiet instincts.